Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is The Narrow Margin, 1952. This is a wonderful film noir. The majority of the movie was shot within the confines of a set the size of a train. The claustrophobic nature of the set is highlighted by face-to-face meetings and blocked corridors by large humans. This film was held up for 2 years because RKO director Howard Hughes wanted the movie reshot with 2 bigger stars. The film is rated 7.7 on IMDb.com and 88% audience approval on RottenTomatoes.com. So not too shabby. Also on IMDb.com, the film is ranked 48 out of 817 film noir titles. Richard Fleischer did a great job on what may be the film noir that defines all the elements. This may just be the classic example of a film noir. In most parts of the film where you would expect music, you're served train noises instead. The only actual jazz comes from Mrs. Neal's, Marie Windsor's, phonograph. New York Times film critic Howard Thompson said of the movie, quote, "Using a small cast of comparative unknowns headed by Charles McGraw, Marie Windsor, and Jacqueline White, this inexpensive Stanley Rubin production for RKO is almost a model of electric tension that, at least technically, nudges some of the screen thriller's milestones. Crisply performed and written and directed by Earl Felton and Richard Fleischer with tingling economy. This unpretentious offering should glue anyone to the edge of his seat and prove, once and for all, that a little can be made to count for a lot." Unquote. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Charles McGraw played bitter, gruff Detective Sergeant Walter Brown. I mentioned McGraw in episode 93, Brute Force 1947, but I didn't really talk about him, so I'll do that here. McGraw was born in 1914 in Iowa. This gravel-voiced tough guy began acting in 1942. His big role was in The Killers 1946. Some of the films include Brute Force 1947, Armored Car Robbery 1950, The Narrow Margin 1952, one of my personal favorites, The Bridges at Tokari 1954, Towards the Unknown 1956. He played Kirk Douglas's gladiator trainer in Spartacus 1960. He was in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World 1963, Hang 'em High 1968, Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here 1969, Johnny Got His Gun 1971, A Boy and His Dog 1975, and Twilight/Gleaming 1977. Oddly and sadly, he died in 1980 following a fall through a glass shower door. Ouch. Marie Windsor played mob wife Miss Frankie Neal. Windsor was born in 1919 in Utah. She attended BYU and naturally she was a Miss Utah. Later she studied for the stage under Bella's mother, Maria Opinskaya. That's a Wolfman reference, by the way. She began her film career in 1941. She picked up bit parts during the war years. At 5'9", she was considered to be too tall and too sexy to be a leading lady in A films. Eddie Muller said she was the queen of the B movies. Windsor began getting second leads in better movies and was in a number of westerns. Her greatest impact was in film noir. Her film noir films include Force of Evil 1948, Hellfire 1949, The Narrow Margin 1952, City That Never Sleeps 1953, No Man's Woman 1955, The Killing 1956. So you don't think she was a stiff, she was also in Cat Women of the Moon 1953, Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy 1955, and the heavily cast The Story of Mankind 1957. Windsor finished her career with a lot of television. She was also the director of the Screen Actors Guild for 25 years. Windsor died in 2000. Jacqueline White played train traveler Anne Sinclair. White was born in L.A. in 1922. White began her film career in 1942. Originally signed with MGM, this actress was not put to good use. She did appear in A Guy Named Joe 1943 and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo 1944. When she switched to RKO, she eventually got better films. The best two were film noir films, Crossfire 1947 and The Narrow Margin 1952. White retired from film in 1950. Paul Maxey played Fat Man on the Train Sam Jennings. Maxey was born in Illinois in 1907. Maxey is only known for a few films which include Till the Clouds Roll By 1946, The Narrow Margin 1952, and The People's Choice 1955. He died in 1963 at a relatively young age. Peter Bracco played gangster Vincent Yost. Bracco, with his hawkish looks, was the Lee Van Cleef of his era. Bracco was born in Pennsylvania in 1903. He began studying theology, but ended up working summer stock. He was part of the Federal Theater Group and began working in film in 1932. He worked in Europe in the post-war years, returning to America in 1947. Bracco was in a large number of television shows and was particularly adept in the science fiction genre. His movies include Black Hand 1950, The Narrow Margin 1952, the utterly horrible Big Jim McLean 1952, Spartacus 1960, Papillon 1973, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest 1975, Throw Mama from the Train 1987, and The War of the Roses 1989. He died in 1992. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Los Angeles Police Detective Walter Brown, Charles McGraw, and Gus Forbes, John Bideau, arrive in Chicago by train. They tell the porter that they are heading back to Los Angeles on a train leaving in less than an hour. The two cops jump in a taxi and head out to Water Street. Always a bad part of town. They begin to talk about the lady they are there to pick up. Brown says any dame that would marry a gangster would be a dish. 60-cent special, cheap, flashy, strictly poison under the gravy. I know her.
Bet you're wondering the same thing I am, what she looks like.
I don't have to wonder, I know.
Well, that's wonderful, Walter. Nobody's seen her, but you know what she looks like. What a gift. What about this dame, Mr. Crystal Ball?
A dish.
What kind of a dish?
60-cent special, cheap, flashy, strictly poison under the gravy.
Amazing. And how do you know all this?
Well, she was married to a hoodlum, wasn't she? What kind of a dame would marry a hood?
All kinds.
The taxi arrives at the house where they are to pick up the mob wife, but no one knows what she looks like. The cop that's been watching Miss Frankie Neal, Marie Windsor, is really happy to be getting rid of her. She's a real snot. With time running out on the train, she is dragging while she packs.
Forbes and Brown, Los Angeles.
How nice. How's Los Angeles? Sunburn wear off on the way out?
You don't rhyme with me, we're a little short of time. The train leaves in half an hour.
Just a minute. I can pack my own things.
Forbes holds a newspaper that shows Mrs. Neal is going to present the payoff list to the L.A. grand jury. They head out and the older Forbes is in the lead, with Miss Neal in the middle and Brown bringing up the rear. Hiding at the bottom of the stairs is a man wearing a winter coat with a fur collar. The fur coat man is scared by a door opening behind him and begins firing. Brown chases him and fires several shots. Fur coat guy gets away, but he's wounded in the arm. Forbes is dead at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Neal's only worried about her safety. Brown takes Mrs. Neal out to the taxi and they head to the station. Brown is beating himself up about Forbes.
Charlie horse?
One time I let him go first, it happens.
Forbes?
Yeah, he was getting old and slow. You could put a live bomb in his hand and count 10 before he'd drop it. I'll never forgive myself.
And this is fun. Some protection they send me. An old man who walks right into it. And a weeper.
Mrs. Neal is complaining about the level of protection she has gotten. Mrs. Neal flirts with Brown and he shuts her down pretty hard. Brown gets out of the taxi about 2 blocks before the train station. He says they have seen him but not her, so she is safer without him until they get on the train.
About 2 blocks from the station, let me out.
What's the idea?
You're on your own till the train starts. There's tickets, money, you pay the driver.
I don't get it.
Just do as you're told. So far they haven't spotted you and they don't know what you look like, but they've seen me. They start shooting in my direction, I don't want you hit.
You're sure it isn't the other way around?
Mrs. Neal gets on the train and hides in Forbes' compartment, which is adjacent to and has a door with Brown's compartment. Two gangsters in the station, Joseph Kemp, David Clark, and Vincent Yost, Peter Bracco, get word to follow Brown because Mrs. Neal is with him on the train. Brown is followed onto the train by Kemp. Brown picks up the tail right away and doubles back. Brown goes to his compartment and makes contact with Mrs. Neal, who is hiding in the adjacent room. Mrs. Neal just chews on Brown.
Who followed you? The man in the fur collar?
No, it's someone from the same stable, I guess. Some creep with a one-track mind.
Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? Why'd you let him follow you? They promised me protection.
Shut up.
They said it would...
Shut up, do you hear? I got enough on my mind. It's a rotten detail, and I don't like it. I didn't like it from the start.
My partner's dead, and it's my fault. He's dead, and you're alive. Some exchange.
Kemp comes to the door with the conductor and uses a lost briefcase as an excuse to search the room. Kemp tries the door on the second room, but it is locked. For some reason, Brown tells the conductor that he wants to sell the second room. Brown has to draw Kemp out. Brown goes to the dining car and sits with an attractive blonde and orders a drink. She gets up to leave and spills her drink on Brown when the train hits a bump. She sits back down and tries to talk, but Brown can't keep his eyes off of Kemp. When Kemp leaves, Brown runs away, leaving his money and a surprised blonde behind. Brown makes his way down the narrow train corridor, but is blocked by the 265-pound Sam Jennings, Paul Maxey. As Brown squeezes by, Jennings says, "Nobody loves a fat man except for his grocer and his tailor."
Pardon me, I'd like to get through.
Sorry, this train wasn't designed for my tonnage. Nobody loves a fat man except his grocer and his tailor.
Yeah, how about that?
Kemp is back inside of Brown's room, and he tries the door to the other compartment. This time it's open. He checks the bed and closets in both rooms, but no Mrs. Neal. As Kemp finishes his search, he is stopped by the conductor who gives him a telegram. Brown is watching Kemp and runs to stay ahead of him. Brown has to turn back when he sees Jennings coming the other way. Finally, Brown finds an open door and goes inside. In the room are the frightened Mrs. Troll, Queenie Leonard, and a small boy, Tommy Sinclair, Gordon Gilbert. Tommy thinks he's a train robber, but Mrs. Troll just wants him out. Brown goes back into the hall. Kemp goes back to the smoking car and gives head signals to Yost that he has not found the woman. Brown goes to a ladies' bathroom, which are all located outside of the rooms. Mrs. Neal is hiding inside of the bathroom. They quickly go back to their rooms, having temporarily thrown the gangsters off the trail. Yost comes to Brown's room and makes a straightforward bribery offer for the location of Mrs. Neal. He offers $25,000 or $30,000, which is between $250,000 and $350,000 in today's money. Mrs. Neal listens at the door to see if she's going to be sold out. For a time, it seems like Brown may take the offer. Yost gives him $5,000 as a down payment. Finally, Brown says no and stuffs the money in Yost's pocket. Yost says to think about it as he leaves. In the morning, Mrs. Neal asks for lots of breakfast, coffee, and cigarettes. When Brown goes down the hall, he sees Kemp ahead of him. He takes a minute to search Kemp's sleeping berth. Brown finds a telegram, and it says Mrs. Neal is on board the train, and he should expect action before Albuquerque, and it's signed Densel. When Brown comes out of the berth, Tommy busts him and starts yelling he's a train robber. Brown picks up the boy like he's his dad. Kemp watches Brown haul the boy by. Brown takes Tommy to Mrs. Troll. Brown goes back to the dining car. The blonde from the previous night comes out, and they decide to go to the car together. Kemp is sitting at a table with Jennings. Brown says he is starving, then he says he's not going to eat.
Oh, hello, how are you? I was just on my way to the dining car.
So am I. Still rushing, I see?
Yeah, I'm kind of busy this morning.
Rushing around the way you do must work up quite an appetite.
What'd you say?
I said you must be hungry.
Oh, I can always eat.
You people together?
No, I'm not eating.
Jennings approaches Brown about buying the spare compartment. He gets agitated when Brown won't sell the room. Jennings says he will talk to the conductor. Brown leaves after ordering room service and has to get by Tommy and Mrs. Troll in the hallway. In the dining car, Tommy sits with the blonde, who is his mother, Ann Sinclair, Jacqueline White. Mrs. Troll is his nanny. Kemp overhears the conversation about Brown running all over the train. Ann sees Kemp looking at her. In the hallway, Jennings and the conductor are waiting to question Brown about the room. Jennings says they are stopping in about 2 minutes. Brown goes back into the room and Mrs. Neal only complains about not having food.
I could have sworn I heard dishes rattle and smelled coffee.
Don't worry, it's on the way. It'll be here any minute.
I may not last that long. Train's stopping. Where are we?
La Junta, Colorado. And don't get peeking at the sights. Why don't you want to play cards or something?
I can't. I ate the deck.
The train stops in La Junta, Colorado. The porter brings the food Brown ordered and that Mrs. Neal is waiting on. When Brown sees Ann coming down the corridor, he hands the food back to the porter and pretends it was a mistake. Kemp stares at Ann and Brown as they talk in the room. Jennings watches Kemp and Brown. Brown sends a telegraph and Yost crowds in on him and shows him the newspaper photo of his dead partner's family and hints at him taking the bribe. The telegram asks for background on Yost, Kemp, Jennings, and Densel. He also says he expects trouble. But Brown scratches Yost's name off at the last minute as if he's considering the bribe. Brown has to tell Tommy a story to calm him down. Brown finally finds out that Tommy is Ann's son. Kemp sends a telegram saying the target is Ann Sinclair and there is no sign of Densel. Back on the train, Brown dumps Ann in the smoking car and Kemp is there too. Jennings and Brown come face to face in the corridor and Jennings is hostile. Brown takes a couple of sandwiches he bought to Mrs. Neal. She was playing her phonograph and started complaining about the food.
You sure took your time.
What's the idea of playing that phonograph? You want him to come in here shooting?
I'll apologize later. Where's the sandwich?
Well, take the paper off first.
Jeez. How thin can a sandwich get?
Here, take half of mine. Take it all. I can't eat.
That's because you've been packing away steaks behind my back.
Oh, stop it, will you? I got more on my mind than food.
It wouldn't be that gal that beat me out of my breakfast, would it?
She likes the plan that Brown has made Ann the target. Brown and Mrs. Neal have a fight about how to do the job. Brown goes back and sees Kemp following Ann. He slugs Kemp and they get in a fight in the bathroom. Kemp does good and almost wins the fight. However, right prevails and Brown beats him down and takes his gun. Kemp says he doesn't know Jennings or Densel. Brown slaps the crap out of Kemp. Kemp keeps trying to bribe Brown. Brown places Kemp under arrest. Just about that time, the porter brings in the conductor and Jennings. Jennings reveals that he is a special agent for the railroad. Brown asks Jennings to pick up Yost too. Jennings takes Kemp towards the forward baggage car to hold him. To let a lady by in the corridor, Jennings backs into an open room. There is a fur-collared coat hanging on the rack. Densel, Peter Vargo, puts a gun in Jennings' back. Kemp and Densel beat Jennings down. Densel has a shoulder wound from the killing of Forbes. Yost has left the train. Brown goes back to his apartment and Mrs. Neal is still giving him grief. She accuses him of taking the bribe and wanting to betray her. She tries to convince him to take the money so the two can escape. She harshly files her nails and the sound blends into the sound of the wheels driving the train. Brown gets a telegram saying the men following him are gangsters. The conductor tells Brown that Jennings and Kemp are missing. They leave to find the man. At the same time, a car begins keeping pace with the train. This would be an amazing feat to accomplish. Brown spots the car and has a message sent to the highway patrol. Brown goes to see Ann. He tells her that she is in his business. He tells her that she has been mistaken for someone else. Ann wants the truth. Tommy comes in and Ann goes to the next compartment to put him to bed. Brown checks on the car and it's still following the train. At the next town, a railroad employee snags a loop off the speeding train with his arm and has Brown's message for the highway patrol. Densel and Kemp go to Brown's compartment. Inside, they hear Mrs. Neal's phonograph coming from the next room. They trick their way in and grab her. She tries to talk, but they keep shoving her down. They rough her up for the payoff list.
Is this the cop's compartment?
Yeah, but I already looked there.
That was yesterday. I still want that list. I thought you said no one was in there.
Who is it?
It's Brown. Let me in.
it is. You've got a nerve barging in there like this. What's the matter?
Where do you think you're going? Stay there and don't make any noise.
All right, boys. Guess it's time for a showdown. So before you make any mistakes, let me go.
She's been here all the time. That cop was too smart for you.
That's where you're mixed up.
Who asked you?
I guess I got my lines crossed.
Where's that payoff list?
That's what I've been trying to tell you. I haven't got it.
Finally, they let her go to her purse. She starts pulling a revolver, but Denzel sees her move in the mirror. He shoots her and then checks on the car that is following the train. Brown is watching the car when Ann comes back into her room. He tells her about the murdered gangster by the name of Neil. Ann says she is Frank Neil's widow. She says the lady that has been playing Mrs. Neil is an internal affairs police officer. Brown has to justify to Ann that he can't be bribed.
I never took a bribe in my life.
Maybe your price was never met.
It never was and never could be. I don't say I've never been tempted. Of course I've been tempted. I'm human like anybody else. To spend the rest of my time worrying when I'll be caught up with by some hoodlum holding a first mortgage on my life? Payable on demand? Nah. No kind of money worth that.
Ann says she didn't know what Frank did when they got married, and when she found out, she left him. Ann says she already mailed the list to the Los Angeles District Attorney. The conductor comes to get Brown. Denzel and Kemp find the fake Mrs. Neil's badge, and now they know they've killed the wrong person. They leave to go after Ann, a.k.a. the real Mrs. Neil. They find the beaten but okay Jennings in Denzel's room. The fur coat is hanging in there. Brown heads towards Ann. Jennings gets another gun. Denzel knocks on the door where Tommy is sleeping, and the boy lets him in thinking it is Brown. Kemp pulls the emergency brake and the train starts slowing. Denzel goes into the room with Ann and has her under gunpoint. When the train stops, it is next to another train, and Brown can see the reflection of Ann and Denzel in the window. Brown tells Ann that Denzel knows she has the list and she should go ahead and give it to him. Ann moves towards her luggage and Brown directs her to the medicine cabinet. When Denzel is in position, Brown uses the reflection and fires through the door, hitting Denzel. Brown breaks in and kills Denzel. Ann reunites with Tommy. Brown and Jennings chase Kemp to the end of the train where he jumps off and gets in the pace car. The highway patrol swoop in and arrest everyone in the car. Jennings and Brown watch from the platform. By the time the train gets to L.A., Brown and Ann are in love. The reporters swarm the train.
Well, they're on to us.
Reporters?
The works, cameras too. How do we beat this rap?
By size alone. I'll go first, Brown. The rest is your department. Good luck and take care of yourself, Mrs. Neal.
That's my department too. Much obliged.
Thanks for everything, Mr. Jennings.
Well, here we go. Gangway, boys. You're blocking traffic. Come on.
Jennings blocks for them as Ann and Brown duck out the other way. Jennings pushes past the reporters, and then they have to turn around and push past him again. Jennings says, "Like I always say, nobody loves a fat man."
Like I always say, nobody loves a fat man.
Ann and Brown walk and then run away into the City of Angels. Two other cops come to escort Ann. Ann says she doesn't want to hide anymore and dismisses the other cops. Her and Brown walk in the open. Note, RKO director Howard Hughes had a scene removed that showed Brown's dead partner had taken a $10,000 bribe to hand over Mrs. Neal. What? World famous short summary? The fat guy was the hero. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I really appreciate you spending the time listening. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at classicmovierev.com. There are links to the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcast and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.